Welcome to Sales Presentations That Don't Suck. And before we dive into any of that, I will right off the bat answer the burning question I know you all have. And the answer to that question is, I don't have an answer. My plants are dying. They've been like this. They haven't grown in 8 months. I don't have a solution. So if anyone out there has a solution for my plants, please give me your best planting and gardening tips. They are water once a week is the instructions in their creeper plants. So if you got any tips for me, please send them my way. All right, everybody. So this is going to be a ton of fun. We got an action-packed hour here. Quick, just like housekeeping with this chat window. We're going to use it up. Like we're going to use it to the max during this. But then also, if you've got specific questions, use the Q&A button and ask through that. Katie, do you want to toss the poll question up?
Absolutely. So we're just going to get started with this. Here we go. How does your company use presentations right now? What are we doing with it?
So I want to get a really good read for where we're at with this, just in terms of like the stage you're at right now. Do you have a deck and you love it? Do you have a deck and it's not working? Do you have a deck and no one's using it? Or do you not even believe in slides at all? It's a fight for 1 and 2 on the list right now. We have a deck and we love it, and we have a deck and it's not working. Nice. We got one person so far who does not believe in slides. And if you don't believe in slides and you're willing to out yourself, I'm curious if you would put in the chat why you don't believe in slides. And while this is coming up, I will get our screen share pulled up here.
You know, this is so interesting. I actually dropped in my LinkedIn today. Shameless plug, go share your thoughts. But I actually dropped in there when marketing hands me a deck, my first thought is blank. I've got to tell you, it's been absolutely hilarious for me watching people's responses to it, because a lot of people are just like, my first thought is, oh no, not another one, or it's obviously very negative, right? Especially for salespeople. You know, we know what these decks are, but one of them was no thanks. I thought that was really funny. Or did marketing and sales actually collaborate on this? And someone was like, "What is a deck?" So I'm excited for what this looks like. We don't believe in slides. I think that's
all right. So so what it's turning out here so far in the poll. We can close the poll even. So we have a deck and we love it at 39% of the room. We have a deck and it's not working just above that at 44%. We have a deck and no one uses it at 11%, and we don't believe in slides. And even one person, Lisa Schultz, said love might be too strong for her opinion of her own deck. Maybe she picked that option. And then Barb said she doesn't believe because she just doesn't have a deck yet, so it's not an option yet. So those of you who love your deck, great. Today, I'm going to show you some strategies on how you can love it even more and make sure that your customers love it, more important. Those of you who have a deck and it's not working, take furious notes, because I'm going to walk through exactly what to do to make sure you love it and to make sure your customers love it and to make sure that it is working. And those of you who have a deck and you're not using it, this will be the path towards having the deck that everyone on the team gets on board with and you start using and have success with. And if you don't believe in slides, Barb, we're going to show you what to do to start using slides, put it together, and have success with it. All right. With that, let's begin here with sales presentations that don't suck. I just want to say a quick hello to everybody joining worldwide on this call right now. And thank you for joining live. And for everyone who's watching the recording of this, this is me in the past saying what's up to the future. So let's dive right in. This is sales presentations that don't suck. Here's the deal. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. So several years ago, I was working at a digital product agency, and my team had an opportunity to pitch to a major entertainment brand, like major. And when I say major, what I mean is like this brand has produced some of the most popular television shows in America, and they were looking to add a gamified loyalty program that we could have built to their #1 show. And trust me when I say you've definitely seen this show before. Give me a second. I brushed my contact lens and now my eye is tweaking. And All right, I think I made it past the contact lens brush. All right, so trust me when I say you have definitely seen this show before. If we were to win this brand and this project, it would have been the largest deal our company had ever pulled in. And when I say a large deal, I mean multiple years and legitimately 8 figures per year. It would have been such a large deal that actually my boss told me beforehand, hey, if we win this deal, we're gonna have to restructure your comp plan because the company's otherwise gonna like go broke paying off your commission, and you also probably would never have to work the rest of the year. So it was a huge deal, and I was spearheading the efforts. And so I pulled a team together, and we spent dozens of hours coming up with the perfect strategy. We meticulously crafted the deck. We got input from team members in different departments. We made sure it was beautifully designed. And then we flew 4 people from my team to their headquarters for a live pitch. And it was really cool, like one of those like, wow, is this really happening moments where I found myself sitting across the table from the executive producer of like literally one of the most popular television shows of all time. Now, due to an NDA, a permanent NDA, I can't share what that show was or who the person was. And although the camera says NBC on the slide here, it was not. It was not something with NBC. People always try to guess that. But this was a really big deal, and this was our chance to shine, to win that $10 million annual deal. And it really felt like all that hard work was about to pay off big time. So we opened up our slide deck and we began. And about an hour later, what do you think happened? In the chat, go ahead and tell me. So did they say, hey, this is the best presentation we've ever seen? Did they hire us right there on the spot? Or maybe even more practically, they say, hey, this is really good. You've made it into our top 3 lists. Let's discuss the project scope in more detail. In the chat there, just give me a quick answer, like what you think their response was, or what do you think happened in that situation? Lisa says, number 3, they said this is really good. You made it into our top 3. Let's discuss this in more detail. Maria's saying they asked, hey, how does this help us? Cynthia thinks number 2, they hired us right there on the spot. Let's get like 1 or 2 more answers from the crowd on this one. Nancy says number 1, they said this is the best presentation I've ever seen. And then Joshua says, thanks for coming. We'll review and get back to you. Well, kind of a trick question. The correct answer was none of the above. None of the above. The correct answer was that we experienced what I call, to this day, a sales deck fatality. A sales deck fatality. If you've ever played the game Mortal Kombat, the video game Mortal Kombat, that's like what it was like after we finished pitching. So what started off as excitement on both sides of the table, 1 hour later turned into the executive producer just meticulously picking us apart like a piece of undercooked meat. And he's like, he's literally like pulling apart our presentation, our strategy, our supporting data, our projected impact. And it really felt like the business version of playing Mortal Kombat. And we could feel our momentum waning as time passed, and then their interest waned. And we were just getting our asses handed to us until finally it was as if a voice yelled, finish him, from the corner. And the executive producer just like reached in, grabbed our heart, threw it on the table, and left it beating there for all to watch. And after that was done, the meeting ended with a less senior team member walking us to the door saying, we'll be in touch. And my team left that meeting with our heads down. The ride back to the hotel was complete silence. And no one was willing to say we blew that out loud, but honestly, we all knew that we did. And then 1 week later, I got an email from them saying, thanks, but no thanks. Now, when I think about how this could have happened, it just didn't make sense at the time, because at worst, we had equal technology compared to our competitors. At best, we had way better technology than our competitors. We had multiple examples of other companies we had successfully built these loyalty programs for. We were more experienced than anyone else in the game, and our proposed solution we thought was pretty damn good. We even had a custom-made animated video explaining the project and what we would do, to drive the point home. So then, what did we do wrong that let it all go downhill so quickly? Here's what we did in that presentation. Our first 4 slides looked something like this. In the top left, we started with our classic NASCAR slide. We tossed a bunch of logos on the screen, and we bragged about how they were a part of our client roster. And then we went to the solution slide, the proven solution slide, where we explained the overview of our solution suite. And we used all the catchy buzzwords like holistic and data-driven, patented, omni-channel, customer-centric, you name it. And then we went to the tech stack slide where we backed up our products and services explaining how our technology was second to none. We had a 99.9% uptime, all the API integrations, et cetera, et cetera. And then we hit what I call the suits slide, where we lined up the headshots of our executive team, like all of our C-suite people. And we said, well, they have a combined 400 years of experience. We have great leadership, yada, yada, yada. And then from there, we had a bit more detail about ourselves. We even showed a slide where we had a big photo of our headquarters, and then it was like with locations in 8 different places around the globe. And then we dove into the strategy we'd custom built for them. And this format was our downfall. Real quick, in the chat right now, just put up the number 7 if your deck that you use is something to this extent, where you have customer logos on a slide up front, maybe not the first slide, but one of the first slides. You talk about your solution, talk about your leadership. All right, so we're getting a bunch of 7s in there. And that was our downfall. And as you're seeing here in the chat, most sales presentations look like this. Now, when I think back to that, if I had a do-over, here's what I would have done instead. Because the big problem is that this is a total snooze fest, okay? Like that format I just showed you. It doesn't show the buyer you care about them. It shows that you care about yourself. And chances are it looks and sounds the same as what your competitors are doing, which means the buyer is like looking for a pencil to just like stab themselves with by slide 3. And I once heard someone say this. I wish I remembered who said it, because I want to give them credit. But they said, it's funny we build things in PowerPoint because most presentations aren't powerful and have no point. And I totally agree with that statement. And so if I had a do-over, here's what I would have done. This slide right here. I would have modeled my entire presentation on the Hamilton musical. And my advice to you is to do the same. If right now you're thinking like, what? Trust me, I'm going to share why that's the case. And we're going to come back to this later on and break down how to go about this. And granted, at that time, the musical wasn't even out yet. However, knowing what I know now, if I had a time machine, I would take this knowledge and I would have gone back and floored them. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a time machine, but after that hashtag sales deck fatality, I vowed to never let something like that happen again. And I told myself, I got to figure this out, and I'm never going to create another presentation that sucks. So that is what I've spent, my life's work doing, is figuring out communication, figuring out pitching, figuring out presentation. If you're not familiar with me before today, I just want to give a quick introduction. My name is RajNATION, aka RajNATION. I'm the founder of Startup Hypeman, and this is Sales Presentations That Don't Suck. I have always been obsessed with communication in its various forms, and I am an interesting hybrid of a rapper, yoga instructor, and entrepreneur with Startup Hypeman. And with Startup Hypeman, what we do is help people figure out their pitch. And that's with startups, scale-ups, and grown-ups at the end of the day. And, if you want, you could say my background is quote-unquote diverse, but after that sales deck fatality incident, I really started to dive deep into the concept of presenting yourself, whether that's in a business meeting or on a stage or anything like that. And over the last several years, I've been figuring out how do we really bring this into a fine-tuned presentation. And that's what I want to share with you today, because it's all about putting something together that helps you stand out to your audience and stand apart from competitors. Here's what we're going to cover today, just the high-level agenda. We're going to cover why presentations matter and when to use one. I want to talk you through the mindset shift you have to make around thinking like an entertainer. Then we're going to go ham and talk through the Hamilton musical. From there, that'll tee us up to walk through the Hamilton presentation method, and that's where you're going to take a lot of notes. And then we'll close with what you can do today. And for those of you attending live, I got a sweet bonus item for you as well. Someone earlier on asked in the chat, will you get a recording of this? Yes, everyone will get a recording of this. Those of you who are attending live, you get a little sweet something extra on top of that as well. So a couple other things I just want to point out here. Throughout this content, you're going to get brutal honesty from me. Number 2 is that I am aware of nuance based on industry, sales process, price of product, etc. So I'm not going to come out here and just be like one of those people who's like, just do this one thing and you'll 10x your sales in 10 seconds. What I'm providing you here is the philosophy, the framework, and the advanced strategies for most B2B selling environments. But I will do my best to speak to potential situational nuance where appropriate, especially if you've got a question in the chat. And then I'm also going to be using the word presentation and deck interchangeably, just a heads up. So let's come into this first bullet point on our agenda today. Why a presentation? Well, you might be asking yourself, why do I even need a sales presentation? And maybe you've asked yourself this before. Maybe you're one of the people on the call right now asking if it's really necessary. Perhaps you've been able to get by without using one because customers rarely, if ever, demand a presentation from you. So why do you even need one? Well, the honest answer here is you don't. What? This guy's going to do a whole webinar on sales decks and start by saying you don't need one? That's right. But I told you brutal honesty, but let me just qualify that a little bit more. You don't need a deck unless you want to win more deals. And I say that because in most cases, yes, it is possible to capture a certain portion of your market without any type of deck. But if you want to capture more of your market and you want to increase deal size, then a sales deck is going to go a long way towards getting you there. And that really comes into play when you think about the three types of customers that exist, okay? So every business has three types of customers. Your first customer is what I call the I already get it group. They require little to no explanation. They've already done their research. They know exactly what they want, and they just need an order fulfilled. Your second customer is what I call the I've been burned group. These people signed up with one of your competitors. They had a terrible experience, so they come to you with a bad taste in their mouth, and they're pretty much just waiting for you to say, we're not going to do that to you. We have an amazing product. Both of these groups are oftentimes ready to buy almost right away. And then there's this third group, and that's what I like to call the guide me group. For most B2B companies, this represents your largest customer base, largest in volume as well as deal size. The guide me group is collecting information and thinking about doing something, but they're confused about the path they need to take. They're confused about what they should do. They've got questions and they need someone to guide them through the process. So today's content is really focused on winning the guide me group because you can get your highest value deals from here. And I will say, even though it's how you win the guide me group, you can also use this same knowledge to have more impact on the I already get it and the I've been burned group. Because the reality is, you may have experienced this yourselves. Those other two groups on the ends there, they price lock you. They're so advanced in their buying decision that they come to you and they say, yeah, we already get it. And also, we only want to pay this much for it. And because they're so advanced in their buying process, like we tend to just bend to their will, right? We say, oh yeah, for sure, 20% discount, no problem, because you're ready to sign next week or you're ready to sign later this week. Even in the case of those advanced people, you can use a deck to get that value back that you were probably going to discount otherwise. And that guide me group, again, for most customers and most companies, is your largest base. And why is it important to capture this group and also get more value out of the other two groups? Well, it's because product alone will no longer sell unless you want to be commoditized. With groups 1 and 3, the I already get it and the guide me group, like I mentioned, they've been burned. Oftentimes you have no wiggle room with them. And since they're ready and eager to buy, we're going to bend to their will. With that guide me group, though, you're giving away money if they commoditize you. And they will if you try to win on how great your product or service is. It is an ultra competitive landscape. So you're not only fighting commoditization, but you're also fighting the other providers in the market. You're fighting the buyer's desire to actually not make any decision and choose status quo instead. Commodification is not where you want to be with the product, right? Commodification is a can of peas on the shelf at the grocery store. You don't really create any brand. You don't buy on brand with the can of peas on the shelf. You buy on lowest price in the moment, and that's not where you want to be. And generally speaking, we think a can of peas should always cost about 79 cents. I also want to highlight this quote here, and that is it was from an article from Buffer on the science of storytelling. When we are being told a story, not only are the language processing parts in our brain activated, but any other area in our brain that we would use when experiencing the events of that story are activated too. And a good deck is going to accomplish that for you. And a good sales deck is also a key part of your company's overall story stack. If you're new to this concept, think of your tech stack and now apply that concept to messaging, right? Your story stack is the different layers of messaging from top to bottom. An easy way to visualize this is like, think of each element in your story stack, which you can see here on the slide, as the different songs on a mixtape. And that's your company's mixtape. And you pop it into that player and play that track loud and proud. right? Your sound emanates and then resonates with your audience when you've got your story stack figured out. And the deck is the linchpin. It's like the hallmark track in your story stack. It is how you craft a scalable narrative, okay? Now, that's the why. Give me, let's do this. Put the letter Y, capital letter Y in the chat if you're vibing with me so far, and if we can advance to when to use a sales presentation. All right, we got Y's. And by the way, if you have questions along the way, use the Q&A button and pop your question in there. I will try to answer it in the moment, or I will get to it towards the end. Great. All right, so let's talk about when to use a presentation and the timing of it. All right. To answer that, we need to first get alignment on the real purpose of a sales presentation, okay? Because nearly every salesperson and marketer gets this wrong, all right? Right now in the chat, what would you say is the purpose of a deck? What's the purpose of a presentation in your sales process? Go ahead and pop your answers in there and let's see what we come up with. Educate the customer, to inform, help them visualize, to close, get to the next step in the buyer's journey to support your story. A lot of these are good answers, and I think I want to highlight two answers specifically. Ken's answer, he said the purpose is to close, and Maria said get to the next step in the buyer's journey. So Ken, what you answered is actually what most people answer. And again, actually, yeah, we're seeing answers towards just panelists, so make sure you do panelists and attendees in the chat there. It's just a drop down right above where you're typing. So a lot of people, and most people think the purpose of this is to close them, but it's really more like what Maria said, get to the next step in the buyer's journey, okay? And I want you to even think about that even in a slightly different way, Maria. Your purpose is simply to gauge their level of emotional buy-in so that you can either qualify or disqualify them for the next stage of the process. That's all. When you reorient around this purpose, it will change the demeanor of your team. It will change the type of information that you choose to share. And it ultimately will change your outcomes. And I am very intentional in writing gauge level of emotional buy-in to qualify or disqualify, as opposed to convince them we're great or convince them to do the next thing. Because when you have this mindset, when you have this approach, it allows you to build presentations that will naturally filter in the most qualified buyers and weed out unqualified buyers as early as possible. If our goal is to convince them we have the best solution, we're just going to create a presentation that ultimately turns them away and make it really me-focused. So now with that understanding, let's talk about the three distinct stages for using a sales presentation. Generally speaking, we all have a sales process that starts with discovery, moves into a demo or a strategy call, and finally advances to a proposal if all goes well. That's like, I would think we can all agree, that's like usually how a sales funnel works. Depending on exactly what you're selling, you might not have proposals and just go straight to like, a contract. You may try to close on your demo call, or maybe your discovery and your demo are combined into one. That's all fine. Your process might use discovery to disqualify them for a presentation, to get to the demo, right? So there's nuance here, but these are the three distinct stages everyone can relate to in a sales process. And each of these stages are where you can leverage a different deck. I'm not saying you have to at every single stage. What I'm saying is you can at each of these stages. Alejandro wrote in the Q&A, what about influencing the customer? Is that not a goal? So Alejandro, I want you to reframe them. Influence is a byproduct of putting a deck together that starts with a mindset of we need to gauge their level of emotional buy-in. Okay? Persuasion is a byproduct of that. So if these are the three phases, and we have to look at like what is that level of emotional buy-in that increases with each stage. With your discovery, your level of buy-in is to buy into doing the demo or the strategy call. If you're doing this at the demo stage, then you're trying to understand buy-in to get to the proposal. And ultimately, if you're at the proposal stage, then it's buy-in to the terms or the contract and the signature. And then knowing that these are the three stages where a deck can be used, you also want to understand that the amount of effort increases with each stage too. So it's not just that level of buy-in increases with each stage, but your own development correlates with the buying. The further you get in the sales process, the more customization and personalization required in your deck, and the more time you'll spend delivering your presentation. So if it's upfront discovery, it's like literally impossible to personalize and customize that deck. If it's down to the proposal stage, you want pretty much a fully personalized and a fully customized deck. And I would say only do a presentation at the proposal stage if the deal size makes sense, right? If it's like put your credit card in for like, $50 a month, that you're putting in more effort than is necessary and probably creating more friction in the process. But if it's an enterprise, if you've got, I would say anything where your average contract value is more than maybe $2,000 to $5,000 per year, US dollars per year, that's where you'd want a presentation at the proposal stage. So now let's talk about the mindset to make all this happen. And the fundamental mindset I want everyone here to adopt is think like an entertainer. All right? Stop thinking like a business person. It is leading to boring as hell presentations. It's making you bury yourself in the weeds of your product or service, and it's making you disregard the customer. The mindset shift you want to make is think like an entertainer. This is what I've done for years, what I've helped others do for years. And when you do this, you have more impact in your interactions and better results with your presentations. The reason I say think like an entertainer is because an entertainer has one goal: make the audience feel something, elicit an emotional response, get that buy-in. When you think like an entertainer, when you make that shift, you will think in these terms. And you want to think like an entertainer and act like you're selling out Madison Square Garden, right? If you were to be put on stage right now to play in front of a sellout crowd, would you give them 20 slides about your back-end technology? Hell no. You'd ask yourself, what can I say and what can I do to deliver an unforgettable experience? You'd solely be focused on making it a great experience for them, not for you. Let's look at some wise words from someone who has sold out Madison Square Garden. One of my favorite rappers of all time, Jay-Z. Type H-O-V, the letters HOVE, in the chat if you are also a Jay-Z fan like I am. We got Katie saying she's a Jay-Z fan. HOVE, HOVE. All right, so Leonida, I love it. All right, so here are song lyrics from Jay-Z from many years ago where he talked about his ascent. And he compared himself to two less well-known rappers at the time who were more underground, Talib Kweli and Common, otherwise known as Common Sense. And Jay-Z said, I dumbed down for my audience and doubled my dollars. If skills sold, truth be told, I'd probably be lyrically Talib Kweli. Truthfully, I want to rhyme like Common Sense. That is 5 minutes. I ain't been rhyming like Common Sense. What he's saying here is, hey, if it were up to me, I have the talent and I have all the skills to hit you with the most lyrically dense, socially conscious raps you've ever heard. But I realized if I was really going to make it big, I had to meet my audience where they were. And just recently, Jay-Z became hip-hop's first billionaire. So with this idea of being in service to the audience in mind, like that's what you're trying to do here, right? You're trying to, I don't want to say dumb down for your audience, but meet your audience where they were and give them something that they're going to love. Not something that you're just going to do. So ultimately, the end lesson here with Think Like an Entertainer is see and speak from your audience's point of view. Now, at this point, you may be asking yourself, all right, I can get on board with that. I could think like an entertainer. I see where we could use a deck in our sales process. But now you may be asking, how do we actually build a deck that stands out and stands apart? So the way we're going to do that is by, like I told you before, we're going to turn to an unlikely source and go ham. The source is, naturally, entertainment. The Hamilton musical. All right? Remember, I told you earlier, if I had a do-over, I would have modeled it after the Hamilton musical. Let's talk about what that means now. If you have heard the musical or seen the musical either in person or on Disney Plus, let's go ahead and write ham in the chat right now. And if you have not, you may have been living under a rock over the last 5 years. Okay, so most of us understand Hamilton and everything. Quick synopsis, if you're not familiar, It is the hip hop musical that's gained international recognition. It's won like 1,000,000 Tony and Grammy Awards. And it is a play about the life and legacy of Alexander Hamilton, one of America's founding fathers. If you dissect the way they tell this story, you have the perfect framework for a killer deck. Now, I'm going to just give a spoiler here. And if you haven't seen it, I'm sorry, but you've had your time to see it. And I'm going to tell you that Hamilton dies at the end. Big surprise, guy alive 250 years ago is now dead. But he dies in a pistol duel with the then Vice President, Aaron Burr. Now, that's a pretty shocking thing at face value, isn't it? To think like, hey, Vice President goes out and just shoots somebody, and the Treasury Secretary at that. We just can't comprehend that in like modern society. It just wouldn't work, right? So even with a conclusion that would seem crazy by today's standards, if you're in the audience, you kind of expect it to happen. And rather than leave the theater cursing out Aaron Burr and wondering how this could have happened, you actually leave the play thinking and talking about the life and legacy of Hamilton. And that's what people know the play for. So how did they do it? Well, I gotta just cue up some audio for this. It's because right at the beginning, excuse me, right at the beginning, Hamilton's introduction gives away the ending. So they go in there, and the opening lines of the play are,
how does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean, by providence impoverished and squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar?
The first words of the play, they give away the ending, all right? They say, how does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot, yada, 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 grow up to be a hero and a scholar? So right out of the gate, they ask you, how's it even possible for someone to have every single odd of life stacked against them and still go on to be an American hero? Then it's essentially their thesis statement right up front. And they convey the point that for the next 3.5 hours, we're going to prove to you it is possible, and that's exactly what you're here for today. And then the very last words of that song are Aaron Burr himself shouting, I'm the damn fool that shot him. So at the very beginning, they give away the ending. But people don't just leave the theater being like, all right, I get it. That's the end. Time to go home. No, you are hooked in because now you're dying to know, how are we going to get there? And the play unfolds from there. But then there are specific markers that get you to that end point along the way. In the play, those of you who have seen it or heard it, you'll know that there are 3 duels that exist in the play. 3 pistol duels. And the first duel is called the 10 Duel Commandments, right? So they build this tension between Burr and Hamilton over time, and they insert 3 different duels together. Because remember, Aaron Burr told us in that first song, I'm the damn fool that shot him. So in order to get us to that end point, we have to buy into the idea of duels, okay? So that first duel is where they define the world. They explain this is what 1700s America was like. Dueling was a thing. Honor culture was a thing. And this song explains the ground rules of dueling, how they come together, what happens, that kind of stuff. And they effectively define that world for us. As a result, we then buy in to the reality of the world they presented for us. We say, okay, that makes sense. I can get on board with that. And Lin-Manuel Miranda, the creator himself, says about this, the audience needs to understand what dueling was like back then. This wasn't drive-bys. This wasn't heated people taking their guns outside of bars. This wasn't beef in the same way beef is today. It was super codified. There was a ritual about it. It was like legal arbitration, but with guns. So that's key. We buy into the world as they have prescribed it for us. Once we bought into that world, then we have the second duel, where a character we are emotionally invested in gets shot and dies. And this shows the significance of a duel, and that even though it had a culture around it, there was real loss that could happen and big impact that could happen as well. And there's tears in the crowd at this point as the audience realizes all of this. So duel number 2 is where we emotionally buy in to the impact that a duel can have. And we say, okay, it can get for real. And those 2 duels then lead us into the third and final duel, Hamilton versus Burr, which by that point feels like the inevitable ending. Because by now, we understand how dueling operates, and we've already felt the emotional impact. And because the story is told so well, and they gave us the ending at the beginning, the emotional buy-in isn't a stretch whatsoever. In fact, we are anticipating it as a natural, inevitable conclusion. Burr and Hamilton face off, Hamilton gets shot, and we're left leaving the theater reflecting on his life and legacy, not crying bloody murder. We leave that theater, we leave the Disney Plus viewing, and we say to ourselves, wow, I didn't realize he had that much of an impact on modern day America. Well, guess what they asked in the first words of the song? How does someone grow up, and build everything and build an American legacy? And what are we doing when we finish watching Hamilton? We're saying, man, what an American legacy this guy built. It's exactly what they wanted. And here's another quote from Lin-Manuel about the intentional structure of this. He says, it's all about the commitment to story, right? That's what drove this forward. Every single element in the show, at every moment, was serving the story. And the story was not a list of events on a historical timeline. It was the emotional journey that Hamilton and the other key characters needed to make. That is what's so important here. And when you think about crafting your own presentation, it is all about architecting it around the story, right? You might have your product, but there is a story behind that product. The story is what matters. The product is not what matters so much. Coming up next now, I want to share how you can actually apply this to your presentations and build this out in your own framework. I want to make sure that we are good to advance to that now. If that is the case, type story in caps lock into the chat window. Nigel's ready. Story. Boom. Lynn is ready. Oh, Lynn Mantel. It's almost like Lin-Manuel. And then if you have questions, just ask them in the Q&A there. Alejandro, I think I answered yours earlier on about the whole idea about influencing the customer. So let's talk about this. I feel like we're ready. We're primed and ready to go. Here's how we're going to avoid sales deck fatality and build a killer presentation. Because I told you, if I had a do-over of that experience with the major brand years ago, I would follow the Hamilton model. It's exactly what I'm recommending for you right now. So here's how you're not going to get killed, but instead build a killer presentation. What you want to do is utilize the Hamilton presentation method. You divide your deck into an intro and 3 duels, so to speak. Each duel represents a specific portion, a different section of your presentation. And in each section, you're going to answer specific questions. In total, with the intro and the 3 duels, there are 10 fundamental questions to answer in building out your presentation. Number 1 is the introduction, okay? Your introduction is where you answer the question, what is the destination for your customer? Just like Hamilton opens by giving away the ending, you're going to do the same. You're going to show them the end game they are striving towards. You might think it would work against you to show this right away, especially if you're trying to build up to this. But I like to think of it as like going to Disney World. So think when you were a kid, your parents said, get in the car, we're going to Disney World. And you're like, yeah! Now imagine if they said, hey kids, get in the car. We're going to drive for 21 straight hours and we're not telling you where we're going. Strap in. You'd be like, no! And you'd kick and scream the whole way. But you don't want to do that to your customer, right? You want to avoid them from kicking and screaming internally. So give them Disney World first. What is the end destination you're trying to get them to? When you give them that first, now you're going to pique their curiosity as to how you'll get them there, and you've got their attention. That destination sets up duel number 1. There are 3 primary questions to answer here. What is their world today? What market forces are changing the world, and what problems does that cause? And what crossroads does that ultimately present? So what's key in the first duel here, these 3 questions, is you're gaining alignment on some basic truth first. Just like we bought into 1700s dueling America, you're trying to get them to buy into some basic truth about the industry, about the landscape first. before trying to tell them they need to change. And I've seen so many decks that will just dive right into like problem, first slide. Or they'll dive into like, here's what you're doing wrong. Before you get there, get alignment, get a micro agreement that, yes, this is the way things operate today. And the thing is if they don't agree that that's the way things operate today, you've got a bigger problem on your hands, and pitching your solution isn't going to matter because you've got to address that part first. You've got to get alignment there. But most often they will agree, and then that gives you that initial level of emotional buy-in. And when you gain that, your customer will more likely visualize towards the destination you've laid out as your presentation advances. And moreover, it helps put them in a position to feel like it is their presentation and not yours. And I encourage you, when you talk about the crossroad that presents, I encourage you to be bold here and take a stance, because it's going to help your audience self-select in or out, which again will create more qualified buyers for you. By the time you've gotten to a proposal, like let's say you're doing a proposal stage presentation, a custom one, there should be no doubt they will agree with your stance. But if it's top of funnel, discovery, or demo, if you find out they're actually not on board with you, you can choose to end the call, or you could talk that through, but you might actually get 30 minutes of your time back if they're like, I actually don't see it this way. Because why would you go out and pitch the product if they don't see it the way that you think they should be seeing it? Okay? What is their world today? What market forces are changing the world, causing what problems, and what crossroads does that present? A bonus tip where you can make what is their world today a just phenomenally better explanation or phenomenally better agreement is if you figure out an analogous scenario that has nothing to do with their business. And then once they agree to that, and once they agree to the way like that other thing works, you make the connection to their industry and their company. Let's head into duel number 2 now. This is where you answer, why is change necessary? So this duel is all about loss and impact, okay? Why is change necessary? What is the trade-off or loss in doing nothing and holding their current position? And what's the impact of actually making a change? So you finish duel number 1, you present it by presenting the crossroads. Now you put an inflection point in front of them. It's like Neo in the Matrix. Take the red pill or the blue pill. And you're building the case for the red pill, which is making a change. But then, because you don't want to be a pushy and hollow salesperson, even though they picked the idea of change, still show them what it would be like if they did nothing. Okay, this part is key. Because you're level setting with them. You're basically saying, hey, even if you pick this, let's say you didn't do anything today and you just went on your merry way, you talk about what would happen in that scenario. And give them some credit even in that scenario. Like, I'm not saying you're going to go out of business. We both know that's a ridiculous claim. What I am saying is you're going to miss out on this 1 or 2 or 3 things. And we don't want that to happen, which is why change matters so much. Another thing I want to note here is that you get to the end of duel number 2. You have not yet actually talked about your product or your service or your company. You've just talked about the idea of doing something, the idea of change. Because when you set it up like this, then your third duel comes in, and guess what? Now it's the inevitable ending. You are the inevitable ending. This is where you deliver your product or your service, where you explain your plan of attack to get there. You talk about, hey, our product does these things. Guess what? You want to make that change? Our product is perfectly suited to make that change. And then you explain some detail about it. You talk about what destination. You restate the destination that brings them to. And then you finally talk about what makes you credible. Okay? So the credibility this is where you talk about your customer success examples. You put your case studies here at the end. If you can do video testimonials, that's going to be your best case studies. But other than that, before and afters tend to work well. And then I also want to mention something that like 99.9% of people don't ever think about. And that is that your credibility is not only your customer success stories. Especially if this is later stage, like a proposal stage, credibility is also reminding them of any rapport you have built up to that point. If you're on a discovery call, you don't have rapport yet. But if it's proposal stage, dedicate an entire slide to reminding them of all the steps you've taken to get to this point. And Once you've gone through all of this, if it's a proposal stage, once you've gone through all of this, then you can start talking about pricing and project scope, like full details, right? So that part is saved for the end. Plan of attack, restate the destination, and credibility. That, my friends, is how you go from getting the sales deck fatality to achieving flawless victory. And if you follow this advice, people are going to want to do business with you, not only because your product or service is good, but because they say to themselves, your company are experts in the field. We have to get on board. I know another person also offers what they have. We got to go with them though, because no one sees the industry the way they see it. So we got to get on board with them because that's a rocket ship that's going to allow us to take off. Right? And that shift in mindset allows the value of what you offer to increase. This is the outline that I wish I knew when I was starting that presentation with the executive producer, and we were looking down the barrel of a $10 million plus deal. And it's the exact outline I follow when I build out pitch decks for Startup Hypeman for myself as well as for our clients. And we get things like close rates as high as 1 in 3. I literally just got a note back from an AE yesterday saying he did 195% of quota for the month of March. I'm telling you, it's deadly effective. There are a couple final things I want to say here. I just want to pause here. I want to make sure everyone's following along with this. So capital letter F if you're following along with this and feel understand it. Please drop any questions in the Q&A box if you have questions at this point. Nancy put the letter Y. I think you meant to put a letter F. And then we've got a couple questions here.
We've got a lot of questions coming in.
Great, perfect. Can you give an example of steps so Lynn asked, can you give an example of steps to show them how you got to the place of presentation? I think, Lynn, what you're asking, and use the chat to clarify here. Lynn, are you asking like what I said there at the end about credibility, about you like remind them of the steps taken? Is that what you're referring to? Okay, great. So what I mean there is like, let's say you're at the proposal stage and you might have like your customer success case study slides, but then also put like your slide where maybe you just like bullet point out or line item out what you've accomplished to this point. So like in a 2-month time frame, we had an initial meeting where we both agreed there were, that you had these pains. We agreed that we could address those pains. We talked to your IT team who said the integration would work fine. We got the CFO's buy-in, right? So those are examples of steps that you'd say to remind them that they've come a long way with you. I hope that helps, Lynn. Let me know in the chat if that did help. We have someone saying, does this sales deck, great, thank you, Lynn. Someone else said, does this sales deck building process apply to investor pitch decks as well? Somewhat, but not exactly. An investor pitch deck has a different format. It loosely follows this, but I wouldn't follow this exact structure for it. And I've actually got a whole different set of material on investor pitch decks. Just follow up with me. I'm doing like 3 different workshops this month on investor pitch decks. So just hit me up and I'll send that to you. Ken, do you see the 3 duels as 3 presentations? Great question. This is all one presentation, just divided into sections. And I'm not saying you show them section, like in your own head, you're dividing it in those sections. You're not telling them like section 1, section 2, section 3. You're just mapping it out through that framework. Ashok said, if it's a pricing proposal presentation, would you give pricing on the first slide? No. Pricing on the last slide. Pricing is the last thing, or maybe second to last thing or something like that. You want to build all of this up so that way when you talk about pricing, they have all these good feels in them, right? You've basically built this case that they agree with. And so now pricing has context to it. And then the conversation is less about price and more about value. And that's where you want to be playing, which is value. Alejandra, I have always been advised to do the presentation, leaving the answer for the end. How do you avoid losing the attention on the first duel? Any recommendation? So I think the question there is the second part. How do you avoid losing attention on the first duel? The analogous scenario goes a long way. So an example of this I can share with one of my clients is we built out a story about the shift in their industry, but we compared it to the way people watch TV differently and how that speaks to how they consume differently. And then their industry is an element of consumption. So we actually literally pegged the idea of, we pit the idea of watching TV today through something like YouTube TV versus 25 years ago using the TV guide channel to find what you wanted. And once we got agreement to that idea that that's the way people watch TV today, then we transitioned into, well, it's actually how we consume overall. It's how we listen to Spotify and how we watch things on Netflix, etc. And then we said, and that's how it's working in our industry as well. And so that's how you make that logical connection for them. And so I hope that answer helps, Alejandro. Let me go through the last couple of slides here, and then we'll answer any final questions. So that's the framework and everything, but I don't want you to get it twisted, and I want to bring up this slide again. What I gave you was the outline for a successful deck, okay? It's the framework for it. Just remember how much information you include and how long you spend on delivering it and customizing it is going to depend on the stage you are at. Like I mentioned before, a discovery stage deck cannot by nature be more personalized than a proposal stage deck. And then last couple things here, because nearly everyone overlooks this part. Remember, we are gauging emotional buy-in as we move down the funnel. So with that in mind, get a read on temperature and figure out if you're headed in the right direction. If when using this at a later stage, using your deck, involve them in the process of building it. Like, you don't have to surprise them on pitch day, and you probably shouldn't, because you're only setting yourself up to put in a lot of effort for potential disappointment, like what happened with me. What I should have done, and that was like an RFP project. Like we were down to the top 3. What I should have done all those years ago was send them a draft beforehand and say, hey, is this on the money? Is this the right line of thinking? That's what I should have done beforehand. So when you're later in the funnel, send them the draft that you're working on and say, hey, does this jive with you? Like, do you feel like we're on the money with this? Do you feel like we're on the same page here? And then when they see it, it's going to feel more familiar for them, especially if you've got one champion and several people you're pitching to. Your champion, your main point of contact, is going to feel like awesome knowing that they helped architect that thing, and they're going to want to, they're going to want to promote you even more internally to their team members. Final notes, what I want to leave you with. Okay, just final concluding thoughts. Sales decks help you capture your largest customer base and are the linchpin in your story stack, which enable a scalable narrative for your company. The challenge is that most sales decks are dry, self-centered, and miss the point. So to get past that, think like an entertainer to build curiosity and sustain interest, and use the Hamilton presentation method of an intro followed by your 3 duels. Coming out of today, everyone's going to get this recording. And then I also recommend you YouTube search Steve Jobs' original iPhone keynote, because it followed this almost to a T. You might also find this interesting. Martin Luther King's famous I Have a Dream speech also followed this framework almost to a T. And William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar play, if you're familiar with that, there is a famous monologue where Mark Antony, if you remember, he gives the whole Brutus is an honorable man speech. That speech follows this framework almost to a T. So I'm not just saying to use it in a play, therefore you should use it. Like, it's corroborated against other massively successful forms of storytelling as well. I also recommend you follow this Instagram handle, The Good Deck. They have a lot of really good slide design inspiration, and they are actually my partners for anytime we build a client deck. They are my design partners. And then if you like podcasts, listen to Startup Hypeman, the podcast. The bonus goodie item for you, for anyone who attended live, is what I'm going to do is we're going to send you the recording, but then you're also going to get a PDF of your sales deck story builder, which is going to map out the intro and those duels for you and give you prompts to be able to essentially like whiteboard paper out your own Hamilton presentation framework. And then, of course, if you want help on this journey, you know that I'm here. We are 3 minutes until time, which is great because I have a bad habit of going overtime on webinars, so we finished early. Let's take any final questions that the crowd might have at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. I normally have a whole spiel of we've only got a few minutes left, but I mean, this has been absolutely amazing. I think one of the most interesting parts, and I'm kind of curious, is traditionally we think of sellers as super exciting, outgoing, and so it's easy to be the entertainer. So I'm curious, just with the last 2-3 minutes, on what advice you would have for those who this is really pushing them to kind of step out of their comfort zone. What advice would you have for that?
Yeah, well, remember, not every entertainer has to be Jim Carrey and over the top, right? There are different forms of being the entertainer, different roles you can play based on your personality, right? You can still be more reserved and deliver a presentation. And if you're more reserved, I would imagine you're going to like have that insightful edge to you in a good way. So you're still going to play to your own personality strengths. And actually, when we create these and we roll them out to a team, we'll sit with each rep and figure out, okay, given your personality, how do you make this the most you so that you're going to be able to internalize this and have success with it? So don't think you have to be the over the top, like, Ace Ventura, Jim Carrey character. But regardless of which character you play, all of those actors, all of those entertainers are in service to the audience. And that's the most important part.
That's awesome. That's really great. Yeah, all in service of the audience. I think that's an amazing takeaway. So awesome. Let's see here. Oh, we've got one more death by PowerPoint. Quick question from Dana. How many slides are too many slides?
Great question, Dana. So I am not the type of person who will say it has to be 10 slides or less or 15 slides or less, because I say however many slides as necessary to get across a compelling story in a concise fashion. So and also because some slides you literally might be on for like 2 seconds. And I don't think that equals like it should subtract from your overall like allotted quantity. So more so look on the side of, am I telling a compelling story and am I keeping them engaged? I also saw Ken asked about pricing on what does it cost to work with me. Ken, just shoot me an email. My email is here. And we can have a chat about that. I'm happy to talk to you about that. Nigel asked about balance between words versus images. You want to be more image heavy, less word heavy. A friend of mine in the industry, Todd Capone, awesome person, authored The Transparency Sale. He's got a ton of psychological research around this, about how when there are words and images on the slide, the brain is forced to decide which one to pay attention to. So you want to have more images, less words. And also, one final thing I should say on that, your slide headers should be delivering the concluding thought you want them to have from that slide. So I'll see a lot of decks where it'll be like solution as the header. But if that's your header, now you're letting the audience determine what conclusion they want to have out of that slide. Versus if your header was, I don't know, something like, let me think here. The industry has already adopted this, right? Now it's really hard. That's not the best example, but now it's really hard to view that slide through anything other than the lens of the industry has adopted this.
Awesome. And best way for people to get a hold of you, since I know we're a little over.
My email is right there. And also, you guys are all going to get, you guys, you gals, you, everybody, sorry, I'm trying to stop saying guys. I'm trying to be more inclusive. It's a habit from many years of living in the Midwest. You all will get a follow-up email with the recording and that story builder as well. And you can just reply to that email. I'm hyper active on LinkedIn, so you can see my URL there. Just go ahead and connect with me there as well. Or otherwise, you can just email me directly.
Awesome. Well, we so appreciate you. This is amazing. Once again, we are so incredibly appreciative of all the great advice. I know everyone here took away a lot of information. I just dropped into the chat a link to our Sales Hacker discussion board. I would love to hear what you guys thought, what y'all thought of that, and what tangible advice that you're going to be taking back to your teams, and what you're going to be adjusting in your current presentation. So go drop that in there. And yeah, give us about 24 hours and you'll have recording, PDF, all of that in your inbox. So until the next time, we so appreciate you. Thank you so much. And see y'all in the community. Have a good one.
Thank you for having me, Katie.
Thanks. Bye.